Let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes
actually
in importance of
What
is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of In the Clouds. I am your host, Stu Miniman. We are here mid-December 2024, last episode of the year, and super happy to be here in the Boston studio. I've got with me Brent Holden, who is the field CTO for North America at Red Hat. He is a Red Hat boomeranger, and he's also been the field CTO at some other companies. Brent, thank you for joining me. Help us look a little bit back at the year that was in 2024, as well as a little look forward as to, you know, this time of year, everybody has to do that little bit of like, okay, hey, 2025, is it going to be more the same? Is it all, you know, AI all the time with an underpinning of every customer asking us about virtualization, or will things be changed? So yeah, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you. Thrilled to be here.
All right. So Brent, first of all, your first time on the program. As I mentioned, you're a Red Hat boomeranger. You're a multi-time offender as a field CTO. No, you and I met when you were field CTO for Hashicorp,
That's right.
which we were hoping here in mid-December that we could talk more about it. But everybody that's watching, IBM is acquiring Hashicorp. We are super excited about it. We can't say too much about it until that deal closes. So we'll have to bring you back on with some friends from Hashi when that deal closes. But
Sure.
could give the audience a little bit, you know, your background. What the heck is a field CTO? How do you get to a role like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I worked for Red Hat for 11 years, from 2008 to 2019. I think I started my career as a chief architect at Red Hat, working with customers and sort of working with the office of CTO. I think that my role is really to represent Chris Wright, our CTO, when he can't be there, which is generally most of the time, because he has a very limited amount of bandwidth. He also has to run a very large organization. So I think in terms of getting customer insights, delivering the Red Hat vision, finding out what problems that customers really care about, that's a big part of my job. I also lead a chief architect team, and their role is really to get involved with those difficult challenges our customers face, especially when it comes to working with our emerging technology set. So I was a chief architect at Red Hat for, 11 years. That was before the field CTO title really came into vogue. I went to Hashicorp, leading their office of the CTO as their field CTO, representing Armon when he couldn't be there, which was most of the time. He had a very similar set of problems. So I talked to primarily, I would say, an executive audience when I was there. I did something like 400 executive meetings over the course of 4 years while I was there.
Yeah.
And then, now that I'm back at Red Hat, I joined another startup for a year. I rejoined Red Hat about 7 months ago. Absolutely thrilled to be back. Super excited about not just, the technology portfolio, but I think Red Hat's place in the ecosystem where, the technology set is going. Really excited to see it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. You mentioned like the filling in for the CTO when he can't be there, because field CTO, one of the things, you go to the customer a lot.
Generally, yes.
I spent a decade at EMC. My last 3 years, I was in the CTO office, and a lot of times it was, hey, customer coming in for a briefing, I want to meet with the CTO, and like I was the junior guy in the CTO office. It's like, oh, Stu comes in, I could come handle the conversation and do that. So I did it locally at the corporate headquarters and didn't have to travel too much. Field tends to be, you rack up miles and you see plenty of customers in person, I know. Anything kind of just, Hashi versus Red Hat field CTO, is there a lot of difference between that, or is it kind of, rhymes, but a little bit of difference?
It definitely rhymes, for sure. To your point about like being on the road, my first year at Hashicorp, I think super difficult, because I was on the road there my first year, including nights and weekends. It was 86% of my time, which is basically 100% of your time, right? So I think for me, excuse me, being on the road so much, that was tough. And it may not necessarily be a fair comparison, because in 2020, when COVID policies affected everybody, right, and we were spending most of the time at home, I was also at home doing most of my meetings remote, and I think that totally changed the way we interact with customers. So I'd say the schedule now, previously prior to 2020, was almost entirely on the road, meeting with customers at their office on site. Now it's more of like a blend. I'll meet a lot of customers here in our executive briefing center. I'll meet a lot of customers sort of, either remote. I would say it's probably split the amount of time I travel. I still spend a lot of time on the road, as my family will attest.
Yeah. Let's talk about those customer interactions because, Brent, we'd love to talk about the product and the technology, but the reality is, where are our customers today? There has been, no end to the hype of what AI can do for us. I mentioned virtualization's the other hot topic. So those two things, I know from my day-to-day experience, I'm talking about virtualization every day. I'm thinking a lot about AI, talking to many of our customers. They care about both of those. And actually, I know you and I've talked, it's like those conversations aren't separate. It's architecturally, what am I doing? Where are my budgets? Where are my skill sets? Where am I learning? What am I building? Give us a little bit of the gestalt of where your customers are today, what you've learned this year, any kind of key things that emerged as you talk to various customers.
Yeah, totally. I talked to a huge variance in customer deployments. So some customers were sort of operating IT like it existed back in 2003, right? That's just the reality. Some customers are on the super cutting edge, right? And they're sort of looking at AI and they're finding all the rough edges with those new types of deployments. Where I think the commonality I see is that every customer got handed a huge bill this year from their incumbent virtualization provider, right? Who will remain nameless, but we all know who we're talking about. And that I think there's a bunch of priorities that the executives I talk to have that are also common, right? Those priorities are developer productivity, cloud migration. Sort of thinking about the variance of their workloads. Most customers I talk to, they're big enough where they host like one of everything. Is sort of what they talk about. So, those priorities didn't go away. They got sort of preempted by this, like, hey, we have an enormous bill increase for this one platform. What are we doing about it? And I think they all sort of dovetailed each other because if you're being sort of short-sighted. And you're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to take this platform and I'm going to replace it with something that looks just like it, but from a different vendor, right? You're going to take on a huge amount of risk. You're going to take on a huge amount of cost. And I think at the end, it's super difficult to justify to your board and say, hey, we took on a huge amount of risk and cost, and we ended up with something that was exactly the same. And so I think the short-sighted view is customers who, they feel the immediate pain of the budget crunch and they just want to salve that pain. The more thoughtful customers are the ones saying, hey, let's be intentional about where we go. What are those priorities that we had 6 months ago? And then how do we look at this new platform as an opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe we need to solve a short-term problem today. Let's set ourselves up for longer-term success, right? So I think that's where the thoughtful customers I'm talking to, that's where they want to land. To your point about AI, right, and virtualization, they're not exactly completely disjointed because you get customers who, they need a new place to land their virtual machines, but now they're saying, hey, we also did this POC with AI. The POC ran great. To put it in production is like $10 million a month. So like, how do we make that real? Because $10 million a month is not reality for us. Yeah. So I think like it's being thoughtful about those future workloads as well.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I know the customer conversations I'm having, everyone has that executive mandate that you need to look at AI, you need to figure out how this plays. And AI is unlike, cloud before was like, hey, on the side, I can, have a little bit budget, swipe a credit card and do something. Yep. AI, the generative AI is not cheap. That is a lot of customers is like, hey, I'm going to build a little cluster and I'm going to do this and I've got my GPUs and that's a big bill. Or even in the cloud, again, that is not an inexpensive, aspect. And if I've got a competing budget to just keep running things the way they were. And by the way, architecturally, that doesn't necessarily fit in with the AI as opposed to what we've been doing with containerization and all that piece and automation. Those are the underlying architectures that I need for my new AI environment. So that's where, for me, it's been a natural conversation. And when I get to the executive level, they're like, oh, I see that and I understand that, as
Mhm.
opposed to if you get down to the infrastructure people, they're like, oh, I need to keep running this, and maybe I make a little bit of change, and it can be a challenge.
Yeah, I'd say the infrastructure folks tend to be a little more myopic, to your point, right? They tend to think about a more focused problem,
Yeah.
and typically a very technical problem that they're trying to solve. How do I run inference with this model, with this hardware, and how do I procure hardware? What I see is that most companies I talk to, they have started a POC, and if you hand somebody like $20,000 for a POC, what do they do with it? Well, you can't even acquire a single H100 with that. So what do they do? And I think the what most customers I see doing is they're consuming as a service, to your point. They're figuring out, like, okay, so Chat GPT sort of like it's part of the zeitgeist now. Every customer knows about it. More than half of them use it, if not 90% of them use it.
Yeah.
That's the platform where they go to. They can type in. You don't even need an account, right? It's pretty cool. Now, I think the problem is that what you realize very quickly is that ChatGPT is a loss leader for their business, right? So not making any money off of offering a free chat service
Sure.
that you can talk to. And I think that the illusion is, oh, we can just do this and we can do it for low cost using this service. And I think I tend to think most of the executives I talk to, they tend to think in terms of like areas of their business. So I'd call those stakeholders, right? So one stakeholder might be like the chief of legal. In almost every company I talked to, dating back 2 years ago when Samsung put a lot of information into the public model that was impossible to extricate, right? So dating back to that moment, every single legal department in every company we talked to basically created like a 20-page edict for the rest of the organization that said AI, absolutely not, right? And I think most companies are being super cautious about how they're adopting AI and being really thoughtful about, okay, like, what are the different trusted partners we have in this space? So that's number one. So chief legal. I think the CFO, like I said, like if you're creating a service, doesn't really matter how good it is. If you can't show an ROI, this is not going to go anywhere. And generally speaking, like there's very few businesses where you can create an ROI based on a $10 million a month bill.
Yeah.
You just can't. I mean, like this is just not reality for most services, right? Maybe for Google, sure. But if you're not Google, right, there's problems justifying it financially. And even then, I think when you get down to like sort of a more technical perspective, like the CTO is also another stakeholder. And you think about like a global risk and compliance group. Well, those folks are responsible for making sure their data is secure. And so they have all sorts of policies around their data. That's also a huge challenge with AI and, data access. And, number one concern I hear from customers is not just data access, but also like sort of the cleanliness of their data. And so AI is pretty much like garbage in, garbage out, right? Sort of the ultimate example of garbage in, garbage out. And I would also say the last stakeholder is the, call it like an enterprise architect or an application architect. If you were all in with one cloud provider, let's say it was Amazon, right? Let's say customer was on-prem, they went all in with Amazon, and their CEO is like, wow, ChatGPT is amazing. We should build a service around that or integrate it into our business. Well, that's only offered on Azure, right? So if you're looking at Azure OpenAI and you want to adopt that as a service, well, congratulations, you're now a multi-cloud application. And there's all sorts of like weird continuity of business requirements that a lot of like the highly regulated customers I deal with, they just simply don't have an answer to that problem. So I think like if you sort of triangulate, again, like the thoughtful customers, like customers for right now are just trying to see like where it fits and can they make it work? And I'd say for a lot of them, yeah, for sure. Like they're able to get like some results with it, but it's like when they go to production, that's the huge gap, right? And I think that's where, for most of like the partners, especially like the big GSIs, that's where like they're sort of inserting themselves is like, how do we get them over that hump?
Yeah. Brent, the name of this program is In the Clouds. When I first took this over a couple of years ago, it was cloud, move to cloud, modernization, all that journey.
Yeah.
Recent conversations, this year has, the virtualization discussion is much more in the data center. The AI conversation, for many of the reasons that you just talked about, are in the data center. Doesn't mean that, look, cloud is still growing at a much greater clip than, IT in the data center, but it's very much hybrid. You talked about, say, some of the multi-cloud aspects there.
Yep.
how much does cloud still play into the conversation that you're having with customers? Is it just, have we reached the point where cloud's just part of IT and therefore it's a certain percentage of the budget? I almost feel, for forever it was like, hey, is cloud going to take 30, 50, 70% of the budget? And it feels like maybe we haven't plateaued, but it's now like it's less of a conversation. And it's just like, well, yes, everybody uses some cloud, and it's just how much you use depends on your applications, your, governance and certain other things. In Europe, it's, a huge, issue with sovereignty and the like. But, what's the conversation on cloud and, these days?
Yeah, and every customer is sort of on like a different part of their journey with that. If you look at like Capital One was on stage with AWS and Andy Jassy at reInvent, and their CIO said, we're going 100% to cloud. I can tell you that 2 years later, like exactly 0% of workloads there had moved to cloud. So I think there is a challenge of like the statement versus the reality. Like most people are realizing now that 100% of workloads are not going to go to cloud. What stays on-prem? What makes the most sense cost-wise to live on public cloud, and what makes the most sense to locate it on-prem? And I think AI is one of those workloads that some AI workloads are going to gravitate towards the cloud. And there's going to be sort of a gravity of data with AI.
Well, coming out of reInvent, and our producer today, Mike Foster, he was at the show.
Right.
And everything I heard is, what was the number one word coming out of reInvent? It was inference.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, inference happens where the data is.
Right.
Where's most of the data? Oh, it's at the edge.
Totally.
Remember back, God, how many years ago was it where it was like edge kills the cloud? Like, I don't need the public cloud anymore, because people thought of the public cloud as one giant data center. And, back from my analyst days, it was like, okay, cloud, help me with a distributed architecture, and edge just makes that even more so. And the public cloud providers have lots of solutions trying to go further to the edge and customer environments. And the good news is we're working with them. I loved, we had, a strategic agreement signed with Amazon, press release that went out. And it's like, oh, okay, you want to use like wavelength local zones, outposts from there. Our software runs there, and that's awesome. But it's, again, it's not one thing. And AI itself, it's, where do I train the model? Where's the data happening? Everything's in flight, and I need to do things. So we know, like, certain examples like autonomous vehicles. Of course, that needs to process real time in there. Some things are happening at satellites. The whole like IoT environment that has been trending for a lot of years. So edge for me became a lot more real in the last year or two with the whole edge, because before it was like, okay, if you're telco or manufacturing, edge matters. And if, finance people didn't care about it, and, many of the other industries now it matters a lot more. It's like, where does fraud happen? It's like, I need to get much closer to the edge where that data is happening.
Totally.
So that inferencing and AI brought edge to a lot more people, and luckily it's something we've been working on for a lot of years.
And I think sort of that point, right? Most people know AI and they equate AI with generative AI now, right? I think that's fair. You talk to, like, if I talk to a CTO of a company and we talk about AI, it's almost guaranteed that it's going to be led with generative AI. And what are they doing there? I think generative AI use cases will tend to be co-located with data, but more centrally located with their systems of record, right? So it's like, it's in my data center, or it's like we're hosting it with public cloud. And I think what organizations are kind of wrestling with generative AI is, how do I bring AI to my data, not my data to the AI? And so the CSPs sort of had this incentive to create like sort of a gravity around their platform. So they want to offer a compelling AI service. And so that way you bring your apps and your data there. And it makes total sense. If I were them, I would do the same thing. Now, to your point about edge, right? What people are realizing is that there's many different types of AI. So when it comes to predictive AI, you want to co-locate that AI where the data is being generated. It's almost always being generated at the edge, right? Whether it's like a rack on the side of a set of train tracks, whether it's in a manufacturing facility, wherever it may be, they want to bring predictive AI to the edge. So I think generative AI tends to be sort of centrally located. Like I want to run my company's version of ChatGPT. That's going to be something they host in their data center. Maybe it's on Amazon too, and it's only privately available. Whereas like predictive AI, like, can I predict like equipment failure from from machines, or can I predict like how far away is a train coming down the tracks based on kind of the vibrations I detect in the dark fiber alongside the rail? Those are pretty interesting use cases, and that's all predictive AI.
Well, and it's a great point, actually. So on my commute in this morning, I was listening to the Cloudcast, which is hosted by our friend Brian Greisley,
yeah, for sure,
who is a Red Hatter. If you're not listening to the Cloudcast, definitely give it a listen.
Mm-hmm.
And the evaluation of the Amazon one is they said when Andy Jassy got on stage, there was Nova and Bedrock and some of those things, but most of the examples that they gave were actually the combination of predictive AI and generative AI. So Gen AI is when we talk AI, it's the buzz and everything like that. But we've been doing predictive AI for a long time, and we know how to get results out of it. When we talk about ROI or some of those things and some of the data issues, we've been doing it. So we know most things in IT are additive.
Right.
So it's like, okay, how do we extend them, and how do we infuse them, and how do we make them faster? Brent, I'm thinking back, my first show of the year was sitting where you're sitting. I had Matt Hicks on, and it was like, okay, 2024, we're going to go from learning and playing to productivity this year.
Right.
I wonder, I from your customer, vantage point and all those conversations, did we make good progress this year? Or is it still more playing, testing there? Or, did we have some customers that were like, hey, I'm getting out of the generative AI stuff? Because again, predictive AI, I hosted a bunch of customers at Summit that shared their story, and we're doing some awesome stuff there and have for years. But generative AI, how many customers are like, I'm doing some great things, I'm getting value out of it, I understand it, and I cost versus benefit looks good?
I think that customers are starting to figure out, and this is figuring out, right? Few of them have figured out like not only kind of where it fits, like what are those use cases? Like I'd say like the use cases I see most commonly are like, I want to deploy a chat GPT internally with our data, right? That's one use case. Another use case is code copilot. I want to generate code based on, whether it's like documentation we have internally, whether it's style guides we have internally, like whatever it is, like it's code that is relevant to our business. I'd say that the third use case is really around like, can I offer some sort of like generative AI use case for like, maybe like customer success or something that like sits between you and the customer, and it's narrowly scoped, right? So like, you got to be careful sometimes with that, because there are some customers this year that they deployed the chatbot to sit in front of customer success, and the chatbot offered a special that was not real. The company had to honor it, right? So I think like, customers are kind of realizing quickly like, hey, we have these three use cases, like the bot, ChatGPT, and Copilot. And Copilot and ChatGPT seem to be super successful because it's like a human sitting between the output of AI and the end product, like whether the work product is like a document you're creating or like, it's a bunch of code. It's a human kind of sitting there moderating it. Where customers are a little more skittish is, do I interface AI directly to the end outcome, right? Like, is it generating results for our customers? That's where our customers, I think, are, they tried it, they rolled it out. Is it successful? Maybe it's more successful kind of behind the scenes, like advising the people sitting on the phone, right? And they can educate their customers on like, oh, I know what that issue is. Let me like, let me kind of guide you through the solution.
Yeah, when I do my reading from like the thought leaders and people, it's the next phase of this is the agentic AI, which an agent can go between a whole bunch of these and make decisions and not just advise but implement. And it reminds me, it's very similar to if you followed self-driving cars, and it was like, okay, I've got a friend with a Tesla that plays with that, and I've driven with him on it, and it's like, yeah, sure, on the highway, and I can even change lanes and do stuff, but are you ready to just say like, I'm starting at home and I'm driving 45 minutes and do everything? Well, maybe not quite yet. There's 5 stages of that, and we're ready.
Totally.
And from an AI standpoint, it's always on those things. It's like, well, how much do you trust it versus the alternative? Because it's like, I used to give the argument, it's like on self-driving cars, I'm not sure that I trust it, but then again, I watch other people driving and half the people on the road, I'm really worried about it because
I was
they're
worried
not
about
paying attention.
I was worried about that before AI, right?
Yeah.
Especially around here, you see people doing their makeup in their car. You're like, oh man.
And especially having, had my children go through that phase and everything, it's like I kind of wish the whole system was controlled rather than
totally.
having to worry about that. So we're always worried about that piece. All right. Hey, from the audience, if there's any questions, please put them in. I've got a few more here. But as we turn the calendar, 2024, where did it go? 2025 is right about here. What do you think will be the same? What do you think will be different? Is there anything, just continuation of these two big trends of AI and virtualization, or do you think, as you look forward and some of the conversations you've had the last few months, what's your take?
I definitely see virtualization continuing as a significant trend. It wasn't like a flash in the pan. I think that most companies, they're figuring out how do we re-articulate what the infrastructure does to serve internal platforms. And so that stuff doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
So, right, even the companies, we started the conversation because of a budgetary crunch, that's going to persist into next year. Right?
Yeah, and it's funny because when I think about cloud, one of the conversations I had with lots of customers for the last 5 years is the conversation is like, oh, just throw some money in Puffa Cloud, and in weeks you are cloud native and everything's wonderful. And the reality on most of it is like, hey, let's look at the journey I'm going to have for a 3 years plus. And by the way, journey means, it doesn't mean I reach the end and I'm done. It's really an ongoing continuation of what I'm doing. And we understand for virtualization, it's like, look, learning a platform, give us 4 hours. We can show you the difference between those and everything. If you've got thousands of virtual machines and you've got embedded, here's the playbooks and here's everything we've done and, skill set and everything like that. Hey, this is not a weeks. This is a months or quarters, if not years journey that we're going to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely virtualization is sort of a change in platform, especially when you've had for 20 years. Doesn't happen overnight, right? So there's like another ecosystem problem that the ecosystem is also catching up to those changes as well, right, to your point. I think, to that, it's probably going to be the case where, AI is going to persist as a thing as well. And the question is is NVIDIA going to continue dominating that space? I think that's a real question. One, because the hardware is almost impossible to get for normal humans. If you're not a cloud provider, right, it's really difficult to procure. And, I think customers are trying to figure out, okay, well, maybe as a service didn't make sense, but how do we make that real? And does it only have to be NVIDIA? Because there's certain cost model to it. How do we make it more competitive? And so for many customers I'm talking to, even bringing it on-prem is an awesome idea. They're waiting for hardware availability. So I think a greater hardware ecosystem for AI would be really helpful.
And I'm curious, I've got some background in green tech. And when I look at, the new H100 and all that stuff, it was used to be okay, how much weight can I put on a floor tile? Now it's like, oh my gosh, have I maxed out my energy capacity in my data center? We had a meeting down in our Raleigh office, and one of our customers is a large energy provider. And they were like, hey, when we went to, LEDs, general energy consumption went down, and oh my God, this AI trend is going to be maxing out grids. It's going to be maxing out, environments. So how much does that kind of sustainability, energy tie into conversations you're having with customers?
Do you remember that scene in the National Lampoons where they hit the auxiliary nuclear button? That's kind of what's happening in the AI world right now, where it's like, hey, we need so much power. Absolutely. Customers are thinking about, especially on-prem, they're thinking about their data center in terms of floor space and power consumption, right? Because power consumption is the limiting reagent. Usually you're going to max out on power before you max out on floor space. They're trying to figure out can we, are there more efficient chip architectures we can consume? Maybe that's a thing that sort of becomes more obvious now with AI, putting more pressure on data centers to, listen, if you only have a 16 megawatt capacity for your data center and AI is taking 5, well, you got to find that power from somewhere else, and maybe consolidation and different architectures, maybe that's all part of it. So I do think that customers are trying to figure out okay, so if we have to bring AI on-prem to make it real, how do we make the space for it, right? And so some of that will be Like, what are those specific use cases? What's the value? What's the like monetary investment we have to make? Part of it will be that like sort of ecosystem of, hey, like it's not just NVIDIA with their stack. It's more of like what I would call like an open stack or an open source stack, where it's like multiple different vendors sort of playing in that space. Like maybe I'm leaning more on Intel or I'm leaning more on AMD. I think a lot of the AI ecosystem is so integrated with NVIDIA and CUDA right now. It makes it hard to have that discussion. So you asked me like where I see the world moving in 2025. It's embracing sort of an open ecosystem around the hardware for AI. And I think that's what's one of the things that's limiting the reality for customers, making it real for them.
Yeah, quick question on NVIDIA, right? They are the default hardware that everyone's using, but how much were the software stack that they are building versus some of the alternatives? Had a wonderful conversation with Brian Stevens about VLLM and where that fits into it. And of course, Neural Magic will be joining the Red Hat family,
Excited about that.
very soon. So excited about that. All right, Brent, I think we are ready for a couple of rapid fire questions from the Red Hat.
All right, great.
All right. So we talked a little bit about AI, but here's my favorite question of the year.
Yep.
You personally, where does AI fit into kind of your, could be work related, but AI, life, personal, home, everything, maybe even cycling,
Well, I would love for like AI to generate routes for me that I can go on. Like maybe we'll get there. A couple of platforms I use. I'd say most people consume AI as a platform. For me, huge part of my job is like meeting with customers, getting those insights from what they're talking about, what are they asking about. And so just part of my work product, I have to generate what are called trip reports.
Yeah. So
it's like, hey, here's the customer you met with, here's their problem space, here's what we talked about. Generally speaking, I'll take notes during those discussions, and then I use AI to generate those trip reports for me, right? As a way to like just reduce the amount of writing I have to do.
Yeah.
And it's able to kind of like grab those context clues that maybe I missed. So I think for me, AI is like one of those kind of basic things I use almost day to day.
Yeah.
To sort of organize and just reduce the level of effort I'm putting into writing.
Okay, that's awesome. Definitely something I know we use so many transcriptions from things and be able to summarize it. It's an area I need to leverage the tooling a little bit more while staying within corporate guidelines about what we're allowed to do. So
Podman Desktop AI Lab.
That's really cool. All right, second one. You do quite a bit of travel.
Accurate. Yep.
Favorite, least favorite things about business travel these days in 2024?
I mean, is there like, the favorite thing is probably like the people, right? You meet different people. I wouldn't say that like, there's plenty of places I go in the country that are not like vacation destinations, right? And there's a lot of time I spend like, even if you do go somewhere cool, like let's say you go to San Francisco, well, you're going to get like the office park tour of San Francisco, and then you get right back to the airport, and then I'm on a flight from FSO to Boston. So I think for me, it's like meeting the different people and getting that face-to-face interaction. You really kind of need that to get real with people. So the remote stuff I do, it's just way harder to do it in person. So I'd say like the people is probably my favorite part. My least favorite part, probably everything else, right? So travel, like I think, this past Thanksgiving in the US, I think that was the most heavily traveled Thanksgiving ever. So travel is definitely back in vogue, because I think everyone was locked up for so long. There's so much pent up demand over this past year for people to get back on the road. There's all these RTO mandates, so people are going back into the office. So it's almost like we forgot all the remote stuff that we learned. So I'd say that like just the volume of people on the road has made it harder. The airlines are having a little bit of trouble keeping up. So I'd say like that's been a little hard.
Yeah. I used to travel more than 50% and then way less now. I don't miss the hotels. I don't miss the air. I miss, people. Some of the interesting foods regionally is always fun. But good stuff. All right. Last one. We know that every company and every industry is a little bit different. So I'm wondering if you have any nuggets from kind of that industry, from the kind of vertical, different verticals that you have that maybe is like, oh, hey, wow, I wouldn't have thought that, so-and-so type of industry was like picking that up faster or slower.
What I see is like every industry kind of moves at their own pace. And what I saw from telco over the past, like, call it decade, was that they took a bunch of hardcore proprietary hardware and they made an effort to sort of open their ecosystem and virtualize it. Well, like, no surprise, that same trend is sort of entering other verticals, right? And so I think like manufacturing is the next big one I see, where the same thing is happening, right? Like if you run a manufacturing facility, well, like Siemens runs the SLA for your entire facility, most likely, or it could be Bosch or Rockwell. There's a few of them. But I'd say that manufacturing is another area where we see major investment to sort of open their ecosystem and shift the hardware into a more software delivery pattern, just to make things a lot faster, right? So I definitely see that going on in manufacturing, because I think they're under pressure, especially now with like what I perceive to be a more reinvigorated manufacturing sector in the U.S. They're definitely under pressure to like figure out not just how do we do it like we did 50 years ago, but how do we sort of modernize the experience, to make it so that we can deliver updates faster.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of, I think one of the biggest shifts I've seen in my career is, I remember, working with some of the, giant New York banks, 20 years ago. Triple NDA, can't talk about everything.
Yeah, for sure.
And now, like, they get together as a group a few times a year,
like
and they share their minutes. We had, when KubeCon was in Detroit, we had dinner with a couple of the car manufacturers, and we were a little bit worried that like they might be fighting. And they were all like, oh, well, this person and that person. And oh, wait, are you trying this trend and doing this? Because look, open source is a piece of it, but like cloud, it's like when we just talk about what did cloud do, it was like, hey, my use of cloud should not be proprietary. I should understand best practices. What am I learning? What are my peers doing? And everything like that. And that, flywheel of learning from people that have done it similarly. And one of my favorite things like this year was on the AI stuff. I talked to these government consortiums. There was one, AI Sweden, and we had one down in Latin America, based in Uruguay, where the government was putting together all of these different groups from different industries, because learning AI, it was like, oh, wow, the autonomous vehicle people and the agricultural people actually had data sets that they could share and learn some of these things a little bit faster. So we can all learn a little bit more and faster from each other.
Yeah, I think that's sort of to me, that's an open source principle, right? Where it's like we move faster as a community than we do as individuals. And I think that for newer technologies, it's especially true, right? AI being one of those key ones.
All right. Well, for those of you that have, we're done with questions for Red Hat. Thank you, Brent, for going through that one. For those of you who stuck with us, Brent is not only, a coworker of mine, he's also a teammate of mine for the Red Hat team for the Pan Mass Challenge. Brent, my joke here is, you fill in for the CTO. Well, Chris is a mega biker, and, you might not put yourself quite at his level, but you are a serious biker. For those people that don't know, like, if you go on the Strava app, Chris goes out for 100-mile rides with his friends all the time and does this. But you do quite a bit of cycling. You've done 10 years of the Pan Mass Challenge. I've done 6 years, and this year was the first year that we had a Red Hat team. 4 of us raised $31,000, which was pretty good. All the money goes to Dana-Farber, which is the Jimmy Fund, is a phenomenal, the leading cancer research, facility like in the world. So what got you involved in that first? And
I think, well, for what got me involved in cycling was still a little heavy. I could always spare a few more pounds, but I think I really want to get healthier and lose more weight, and cycling is a very efficient way to burn a lot of calories, right? So I'll burn like 1,000 calories every 20 miles I go. That's pretty good, I would say. So, the faster I go, like, I think the old cycling mantra is it doesn't get easier, you just go faster. Right. So, I'll, like, Chris will hammer out 100 miles at like 22 miles an hour, right? I'll do 100 miles at like 18. Still pretty good, right? Still pretty proud of that. I think for me, I got into cycling. The reason I got into Pan Mass, though, is I grew up with my grandparents, and my grandfather passed away of jaw cancer. And, for me, I was, obviously pretty bummed about that. I was very close to him. But I think for how I could contribute to that, I realized very quickly, I'm not going to find the cure for cancer. It's not going to be me. But I can do something to help support that cause, right? And he was treated at Dana-Farber.
Yeah.
here in Boston. So I think for me, like that sort of program project, I don't know how initiative, it really hits home for me. It's something I hold very personal. So I feel personal responsibility to go out, raise money, and contribute, and then the ride is the reward.
Yeah.
Right. So I really dig that aspect of it, and I've met all sorts of like really cool people who do the event. You get all people from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of skill levels. Definitely an awesome event.
Yeah, I mean, Brent, like for me, like I can't run, my knees cannot take it, and my height and weight, it's not good. My sister helped. The two of us talked, and we're like, hey, we should ride more and let's stretch ourselves. We'd not done more than 20 miles before, and we signed up for the 50. She did it with me for a couple of years, and I grew myself to do like the 2-day 162 mile, which most people are like, that's crazy, but it's like, I know so many friends that like do the couch to the 5K, 10K, half marathon.
Yeah.
Cycling's kind of the same. Like, you can do it. And I was super excited because I was putting together a Red Hat team because I wanted just some people to hang out with.
Yeah.
And when I heard you were rejoining Red Hat, I was like, awesome. And you joined the team, and we recruited a couple of new people. We're always looking for some more people. So we'll be signing up January 2025. We signed. So, hey, if you're in the Boston area or want to come to the Boston area and cycle, links in the chat as to what we've done. We're happy to tell you more about the Pan Mass because it is one of those things. It's an amazing community. And just like once you've done it, it's like, oh my God, you feel so good. And there's so much community support that like every year it's like, am I going to train for it? And it's like, yeah, I'm going to train for it and I'm going to do it. But the ride is the reward, and it's really good. And the community around it is phenomenal. So hopefully check it out. The link's in there, and we'd love more people to be able to join.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely those training rides really add up. I think every year I try and do like 3,500 miles every year. So I hit that goal this year. Very proud of that. I think most people who do Pan Mass don't do 3,500 miles a year. Yeah. Most people who do it, it's a challenge, but I think for the people who finish it, it's extremely gratifying. It's actually, my perception is it's not like the number is way more intimidating than the actual work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm worried about the ride. I'm worried about the fundraising, and team can help with both of those. Brent, pulled me a little bit faster on the ride that we did out there. But yeah, and I mean, I do like 2/3 of my training indoors, like on a Peloton, because here in New England sometimes the weather's not great for it. But
not cooperative.
It's it is good to get out there training rides with things like that.
Yeah, riding behind me is like riding behind a box truck, basically. Right.
All right. Well, hey, Brent, thank you so much. It's great to chat with you and share everything we're hearing from customers 2024. Look forward to 2025. And yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Really all right. And please, as always, if you've got topics, if you've got suggestions on guests, love to have your feedback. My cadence has been about once a month on these, which we do plan to keep doing through 2025. So thank you so much for watching today. And thank you for joining us on your journey in the clouds.